Hi, everyone. This is my performance face. Welcome to the panel that's being organized by the blog Everyday Orientalism. I would like to invite you to this fantastic panel that the blog has organized. And the co-organizers of the panel are Catherine Bluey, Usama Ali Gad, and Rachel Myers, who are the organizers of the event and the blog Everyday Orientalism. And today we're here for the panel Academia and Visa, Gatekeeping in North America and Europe. We have 3 panelists instead of 4 today because of the fact that we would like to just say that one of our panelists, Osama, is not feeling well and will not be able to join us, but he will be here with us in spirit. And he has also written on the question of the topic that we're speaking about today as well. We're also currently being, let's say, sponsored in terms of we're being supported by a few, well, let me just read it properly because I wasn't expecting to read this. There you go. Yeah, so we are being co-sponsored by the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and the Canadian Association for the Study of International Development. It's important to mention our co-sponsors because, we thank them for their help in making this possible. So let's begin. My name is Girish Daswani. I am an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Toronto here in Canada, also known as Turtle Island. Toronto is the home of many indigenous peoples, including the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and my university is is on the land of that has been taken by the Crown, the British Crown, and given to the university in the 1800s. So I'd like to acknowledge that this land was actually taken and given by the British Crown to the university, and there has been no real true acknowledgement of that, or no reparations that have been had. My campus, which is at this place called Scarborough, my campus, which is at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, is also on land that is been associated with what has been called the Williams Treaty. And the Williams Treaty is a questionable treaty, which means that it was not necessarily, the treaty wasn't signed fairly or according to equitable means or ways. So we have questions about the land that we are on. I just don't want to give a land acknowledgement without acknowledging that no structural reparations or real forms of recognition have been made apart from a liberal discourses of thanking the fact that we are on this land. Now, this is linked to what I want to go on to say in the panel as an introduction. And this is because we're still, the universities that we are on, whether it's in the UK or settler colonial states like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also former colonial countries, we're thinking about how the universities that we are on are being funded or were funded through colonial plantations, slavery, and theft of land. And theft of land, meaning that we are still on land here, at least in Canada and in the US and in settler colonial states, that has not truly been, not just simply acknowledged, but there's no reciprocity that has been made in trying to move beyond the recognition of the land. So I would like now to just briefly open up this panel. And I'd like to say one or two things before I introduce our speakers. So the rules of the panel are, I will basically introduce the speakers. We have 3, and they will each have about 7 to 10 minutes. So we have a bit more time to speak. They'll take turns, and we'll have a second round with the speakers, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers and a conversation. I do welcome the conversation because I think that I would like, we have a lot to say about this topic, and I think it's a very important one. And I guess I'd like to raise a question about the issue of visas and the travel, because it's not just about borders, and it's not just about a bureaucracy, but it's about the question of wealth and how wealth flows from one direction to another. Because we all know that when the universities in the US, in the UK, in Canada want to bring academics or students from the global South, if wealth or transfer of wealth is involved, it's very easy. So when you're trying to recruit students and faculty and to bring their money to these countries, like we just had something in my university where they were trying to recruit through MasterCard students from the African continent to Canada, and they invited in the beginning diplomats and academic administrators from the African continent. And this was all about bringing money to the campus, right? So the language that was used was inclusion, equity, diversity. But the question then becomes, how does this language or politics of a recognition, this liberal discourse, become used, but never actually about reciprocal relations? Because when money is flowing from the global South to the global North, this form of movement or flow becomes easy. Visas are given because somehow this is made possible. So without reciprocity, when academics from the global South or with passports from the global South want to move, without there being, I'm going to give you lots of money when I move, there's no reciprocity, and then there's a lack of respect as well. So lack of reciprocity, lack of respect linked to the passports you hold. But I think it's more than just the passports that you hold, but it's also about these kind of these infrastructures of unfreedom that do not allow you to freely move and to share and exchange knowledge. And I think it's also linked to the question of financial flows, which are also lopsided. So I'll stop talking, and I will now, basically, I'll introduce the speakers. And let me see, by doing that, I need to go to the website. So our first panelist for today is Ozden Amelis Ulu, and she's a social psychologist and a feminist who cares passionately about social justice. She's a lecturer in the School of Psychology at the University of Sussex in the UK, and she was previously a visiting assistant professor at Clark University. Her research interests include intergroup conflict, discrimination, collective action, and a solidarity between groups. And Amelis, I would like you to turn on your mic and to join us. And if please, I would also like you to pay attention to the group chat. We'll be sharing one of the Twitter links that is attached to this particular conversation. So Amelis, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Girish. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this roundtable panel. It is great that we have the opportunity to discuss issues like this, and I believe there will be more panels like this one in the future because, first, visa problems are increasing day by day, and second, we need to raise awareness about the challenges of visa applications, especially for people from the global North. So I want to start with a story today, and this is not the same story I put on Twitter, but a different one. So my husband, who is also an academic and who has the same passport I have, Turkish passport, we were at a party with our colleagues recently. And then we started talking about international conferences, going in person after a long time. Due to the pandemic, we couldn't go to conferences in person for a few years. What we noticed is that everyone at the party was very enthusiastic, very excited about this return to all normal. People were talking about how they would go to different conferences, mostly in Europe, and how they were planning to visit some other countries on the way back. Both my husband and I, we were nodding, smiling, yet we knew that this is not how we live our academic lives. Someone finally asked which academic conferences we would attend next year. We said we would attend only one, the best. And we had to kindly remind our colleagues that, like, for us, when you don't have privileged passports, like our colleagues, the ones who are from Global North, then it's not very easy to travel from one country to another, especially in North America and Europe, when you have a passport like ours. Then, as usual, we started explaining how time-consuming, costly, humiliating the visa process often was for us, and shared some personal stories where all visa applications were found either inadmissible or rejected, even though they were flawless. So, I mean, maybe Catherine, you can put the story in the chat. This is the story, or yeah, thank you so much, Girish. This is the story I'm referring to, and it's a different one. So you know what I'm talking about. And some of our colleagues at that party showed some like sympathy and support, and some said things like, wow, Jesus, really? Oh, that's terrible. But they weren't really interested in our own story in the first place. And they quickly move on to the next topic. And today, I would like to draw attention to the growing problem of restricted access, inclusion, diversity, and mobility in academia due to the powerlessness of Global South passports. Unfortunately, people with such privileges are usually unaware of visa challenges because privilege is invisible to those who have it, right? However, the lack of passport privileges is often a neglected structural barrier in academia, especially for those who already experience discrimination or disadvantages due to their race, gender, ethnicity, disability, or class. Now that we know what the structural problem is, and almost every academic with such powerless passports suffer from this problem, I would like to propose some recommendations for higher education institutions, for international associations, and also for Global North scholars who are willing to address any of these issues we talk about today. I collected these different recommendations based on my own experiences, based on my own observations, as well as with my interactions, offline and online interactions with scholars from Global North and Global South. Of course, the list I'm going to provide today, I have 5 different recommendations. It is neither fixed nor complete. The list rather includes a set of ideas, hopefully lead to change, or at least an increased mutual understanding between Global North scholars and Global South scholars. So what are those recommendations? First of all, higher institutions and international associations should consider hosting their annual events in places located elsewhere than North America and Western Europe, where participants can travel with less difficulty. There are actually some countries that fall under the category of either visa-free or visa on arrival. So these countries can be given priority over North American and or European countries. And organizing these conferences in such places would also attract more scholars from the Global South. Second, higher education institutions and international associations should also adopt a more participatory and inclusive approach when selecting a conference venue. For example, members, past attendees, and potential attendees should be included at all stages of consultation and decision-making for a more democratic and a bottom-up selection process. These associations may get either qualitative or quantitative input from their members, especially from those who struggle to travel due to visa issues. The third suggestion I have is related to like some of the difficulties of having those conferences in a Global North country, because I know that sometimes a conference needs to take place there. So suppose this is inevitable and Global North country is famous for its long visa process. We were just talking about like how Canada takes like at least 6 months to be able to just like give that visa to people. So in that case, conference organizers should take extra care to immediately let attendees know about the status of their submission. This would allow the attendees to receive their invitation letters from their associations in advance, I believe ideally 6 months before the conference starts, and this will help them complete their applications on time. So my first suggestion is related to hybrid conference mode. Even though nowadays it is highly frowned upon for not giving a real conference feeling or lacking meaningful interactions, especially like some people claim that the pandemic is over, and I don't think so. But anyway, because they say that, we need to go back to normal. So I believe that higher education institutions and international associations should institutionalize the new post-pandemic hybrid conference model. So if the model is impossible, because this is sometimes what some organizations and associations claim, if it is impossible to execute due to financial, physical, or technical reasons, then the presenters should be given the opportunity to present, to send their audio or video recording, to make themselves and their research known to others. So my last recommendation is for Global North scholars, especially. In my opinion, Global North scholars should consider integrating a more reflexive and introspective stance into their daily lives and academic works. A self-inspection as such would increase their awareness about their own positionalities in general, and their privileges, biases, and assumptions in particular. And this reflection may help them reposition themselves vis-a-vis Global South scholars in a power-sensitive, non-binary, and non-hierarchical fashion. So our workplaces, which we have no control over, shouldn't determine our academic future. But unfortunately, they largely do, especially in the space of academia. So today, I invite all scholars to provide their support and solidarity to break down the barriers that limit global academic mobility for a more diverse, equal, and inclusive academic space for all of us. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Melis. And thank you for the recommendations. I think it's important that we are here not to just grieve over the fact that those of us with passports from countries in the Global South, or those of us from the Global South, have difficulties in being able to access the same venues of academic learning and sharing and research, but also to think about the possible ways of mediating, but also helping to create new infrastructures and new ways, thinking about the venue being more inclusive, thinking about how much time you need to apply for these visas are very good suggestions. And I thank you for that. I just want to say that, it makes me think about the fact that how changing passports is also one way that a lot of academics try to navigate this, right? So for example, coming from the Global South with a Ghanaian passport or with a passport from India or somewhere else, and then you over time, you get a dual citizenship, or you change your passport, or you get your green card, and somehow traveling overnight becomes so much easier. I mean, I know so many of my academic friends from either from Lebanon or from Egypt or from the African continent, who've, by changing passports, by getting that new nationality, that life transforms. But that doesn't happen easily, and it doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't mean that everybody wants to get an extra passport. So I remember when I was living in Singapore, I had an Indian passport for the first 21 years of my life. I never went anywhere. Like I actually physically never left the island. But when I got my Singapore passport after serving 2.5 years in the army, my world transformed. I was going to Europe, I was like traveling, and somehow that passport made all the difference. Even when I cross borders with my Singapore passport now, they look at my face. I was in Greece not long ago, and your stories about going to Greece. And I was crossing the border, and this guy at the border, a government a person looked at me and looked at my passport and was like, "Why don't you need a visa?" So it becomes, and he didn't want to let me through, because my passport said I could go through, but my face did not actually. He didn't want to let me through. There's something in him said this guy should not come through without, he has no right to walk through this. So it took like 5-10 minutes before I could actually get through, because he had to speak to like several people. So just the question of not just your passport, but also how you look. So racial profiling, racialization also plays a role. How you dress, how you speak. I'm going to stop talking for a while, and I'm going to pass the mic over, and I'm going to also start to introduce my next speaker. So my next speaker is from Ghana, and so Michael Asante is an assistant lecturer in the Department of General Studies at the University of Environment and Sustainable Development, Somania, in the eastern region of Ghana. And he's currently co-editing with David Van Schur and Kofi Aka a special issue on decolonizing classics in Africa for the Bulletin of the Institute of Classical Studies, which is forthcoming in 2022. Michael, I hope that is the introduction that you wanted. Are you here? Just wanted to see if did Michael get ejected from this room? No, he's still here, right? Michael, if you can turn on your mic and speak. Oh my God, I think he was actually, I think he lost a connection and he's not here. Okay, so we are going to come back to Michael after this. So Heba, I'm going to start to introduce you now, just to let you know, because you're going to take over the next spot. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our third speaker, who's going to become our second speaker, who will then be, hopefully Michael will find a way back into the room. So fantastic. So my next speaker is Heba Abd el Gawad, who is she is Egyptian, an Egyptian heritage and a museum specialist. She's the project researcher of the AHRC-funded project Egypt's Dispersed Heritage Views from Egypt at the Institute of Archaeology at the University of College London, aimed at amplifying the voice, visibility, and validity of modern Egyptian communities in UK museums. There's a lot going on right now with regards to that, so I'm sure you'll be following the news closely. She has previously held or led various curatorial roles in the UK, including co-curating Two Temple Places 2016 Beauty, Beyond Beauty, Transforming the Body in Ancient Egypt exhibition, project the curator of the British Museum's ASIU project, and has a guest curated Listen to Her Turning Up the volume on Egypt's Ordinary Women exhibition at the Petri Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. More recently, she was a Museo Egizio Turin scientific coordinator for the Egyptian European EU-funded Transforming the Egyptian Museum in Cairo Tahrir project, redisplaying the Old Kingdom galleries and introducing an operation master plan. So Heba, you come with a lot of credentials. Now I pass the mic to you.
Yeah, and interestingly, they are all EU related, or perhaps the UK is not in the EU anymore. Like they are all global North related, but that doesn't make me have less gatekeeping links, actually more, because despite of all the years that I've spent in the UK and invested in the UK, being a PhD student and later scholar, curator, given the extensive amount of time that I spent as a student, I'm legally unable to apply for a citizenship in the UK, despite all the taxes that I've paid, all the economic investment that I've made. But these years would never count. So even if I want to have this other passport for logistical reasons, just to make my life easier, because currently, as Milas have said, and given the whole issue of the panel, my life is similar to, and I'll share something with all of you. Would it be possible that we enable the sharing, Garish?
Yes, and I'm going to actually make you the co-host, if and that's just one way.
That's fine. Yeah.
And there you go. You should be able to share right now.
Thank you. Yeah. It's very similar to this work of art that was done by an Egyptian citizen. He's not even an academic. And this is him commenting, or this is his art contribution, his artistic contribution, commenting to the level of paperwork that global South, or specifically in this case, Egyptian citizens would have to apply for to be able to travel anywhere around the world. We usually call our passport the green passport that is not very green. Green for us means prosperity, but with the color of the passport, we're doomed. It doesn't allow us to enter many places. And given my work and being someone who does specialize in the heritage and the museum sector, this is particularly problematic for me because while my own heritage is welcomed everywhere around the world, there is no single spot, there is no single country in the world that doesn't have an ancient Egyptian collection. And I think this can be equally the case for many other African countries and the Middle and Near Eastern regions, most of the global South part of the world. But with the case of Egypt, there has been a lot of draining of our heritage and exporting our heritage to the world, particularly during colonialism, that while my heritage is welcomed everywhere, I'm not welcomed in the very same countries that find pride and privilege in my heritage. And today, when we are having all of these discussions on decolonization, on repatriation, there is so much talk about returning, taking the objects back to the countries of origin, and equally healing the relationship that source communities have with museums and academic institutions that have once stripped us of not only our material heritage, but equally our ability to produce knowledge around the heritage, or our ability to be capable of owning our own narrative. Gatekeeping here has far more profound implications on not just being able to enter the country, but for example, for myself, to be able to specialize in Egyptian heritage or archaeology, and to be able to compete on an international level on my own heritage, I had to seek a degree from abroad. I had to seek a degree from the global north just for me to be acknowledged and acclaimed. And while the visa is a huge issue, but there is equally the knowledge production and the gatekeeping in terms of knowledge production and even accessibility, because the question of, or the thinking how in COVID, that turning everything into a digital sphere meant that everyone has equal access to all and everything. This is not the case, because for me to be able to access the internet today, or in the case of Michael, who have just lost the connection, I had to maneuver far too many connections to be able to make sure that I would have a stable connection for the 1 hour that I'm staying here. So accessibility is problematic. And what I always found interesting is that while we are focusing today on the academic world, I would like to bring attention equally to the local communities, particularly in the previously colonized areas where a lot of academic disciplines are now striving for, like in the case of Egypt, if we're talking about the discipline of Egyptian archaeology or classics in Egypt. These are disciplines that are totally striving on studying our heritage and our country, while all of us, have no access to the same countries where the scholars who study us or those who observe us come from, or even the countries that host our heritage come from. And in a project that we've been running over the past 3 days, 3 years, sorry, we've been looking into ways where we can engage local communities on the questions of decolonization, on the question of how and why did heritage get dispersed all over the world, and the colonial legacies and implications that come with this. Usually the response that I used to get whenever I talk to any Egyptian here is that once they know the scale and scope of dispersal, the thing that comes to mind, or the joke that we all make, is that, please, can you just tell them that there is a wrapped human being, a wrapped mummy, also in Egypt, who is willing to travel the world. So we are, even the average citizen who's not a scholar, who's not in academia, is aware of the fact that when it comes to our heritage versus us, the human beings, heritage versus our lives, heritage tends to win every single time. And with heritage comes the academic disciplines that are affiliated with this heritage. This has been particularly problematic for our region in the sense of not only having visas to access conferences or to be able to have some sort of social and academic mobility, but it came a matter of a lot, the threats that people were having towards their lives and being able to have access to a safe space or a safe zone that in reality was not allowed for many of us during the time from 2011 up till today, where there has been few days ago, a ship has sunk with 86 Lebanese citizens who were trying to flee to Europe, and that barely made the news. But however, even if they could have, luckily or fortunately, unfortunately, they are not with us today, and perhaps this can be an opportunity for all of us to remember those who have lost their lives in making such journeys just to be able to have a better life, while Lebanese were not allowed, or even if they've managed to take the sea and arrive to a European border, in that sense would have been easier, but to any border, they might have not been admitted in. But it is these very same countries that are denying us access during times of political turmoil, or when access is a life savior. At this moment, they were pumping a lot of funds into our heritage. So, for example, the initiative that came out from the British Council in 2015, which is called the Culture Protection Fund, putting millions and millions of British pounds to conserve and preserve heritage that comes from the Middle East and North Africa. England is known, or the UK is known for admitting the least number of refugees or the least number of asylum seekers coming from this country. To add to the irony, in 2018, there has been an Egyptology conference, which is a conference discussing the archaeology and heritage of Egypt that was held in Swansea in the UK, where all of the Egyptian speakers were unable to attend the conference because all of them got their visas denied. The irony is here, the irony is there. Another ironic event is the fact of how one of the boats that was carrying few Syrian refugees who were in the English Channel, and a reporter had the guts, a BBC reporter had the guts to stop the boat and to actually have an interview with the refugees without actually making any attempt of saving them. And they were not allowed entry into the UK. So when the question comes, be it our heritage or our lives, our heritage always wins. While our heritage or the disciplines that are striving from the material culture and the equally intangible culture that we possess, who perceive all of this heritage as extremely priceless, on the contrary, we, the people, not only the academics, but we as the collective, we are quite cheap. Our lives does not matter or does not count in comparison to the heritage. And I think this is an important statement to bring, particularly in the current decolonizing wave that most of the disciplines are striving for, or perhaps maybe struggling with, that colonialism, it did happen in the past, but the implications that we're facing today, part of it is that visa gatekeeping is the byproduct of colonialism. It is still up and running, it's persisting. We are not, this is not something that we can simply you cannot undone the atrocities of colonialism. And what we are fighting against is not as what we, or perhaps the academy want us to think, that we're pushing against recognizing the past, but we are equally pushing against the colonialism of the present. That's all I've got to say today.
Thank you very much, Heba. You bring up and you have raised very important questions about the value of the people or humans who are actually the ones who are migrating, moving, traveling, versus the idea of knowledge invested in heritage and how that becomes valued over human life. And also the question around colonialism, because I think you made a very important point about how colonialism is not in the past. right? It's the infrastructures of a colonialism in the present which continue to create these infrastructures that do not allow the valuing of human life in the same way, and which also speak to, and which allow certain groups, let's say in the global south, who are either extremely rich or politically connected, to have a life that resembles what we all hope for or aspire to or should receive, but the freedom that they have is also very limited to those who are at the top, right? The elite.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Michael he sent me an email. His university is currently experiencing a university power cut. In Ghana, you would call it dumso. Dumso means off on, which literally means like lights off, lights on. And so he's experiencing that right now. It's been ongoing. Dumso is not something of the past. It's been ongoing since 2012 in very serious way. So we will invite him back. When he does come back, we'll allow him to have his time. In the meantime, we will continue with our conversation. I would like to invite Panelists and Heba to say if you have any few words to come back and say anything else before we open up the conversation with the people who are here with us, because I'm quite sure there are lots of people here who have things to add as well. Do you want to go first, Panelists? Anything else to add?
I mean, yeah, there are a lot to add, but I'm like, which one, I should pick. So yeah, I mean, I guess like there's another thing I couldn't really touch so much during my talk is that like this funding issue, like for example, when you receive funding, like as a Global North scholar, you can actually spend it on your travel or hotel. But when you receive the same funding as a Global South scholar, usually they don't give money for our visa expenses or for us to be able to travel to another city, right? You usually, like, especially if you don't live in metropolitan areas or in your capital, in the capital of your country, you can't really get to the visa appointment. So like there's like this inequality problem there as well. So that was something, like I have been reflecting a lot, but I couldn't really talk like in 7 minutes. But yeah, like, I mean, even though we are treated equally, right, as scholars, but no, the backgrounds we have, it creates so much problem because we are spending so much money and time to be able to attend the same conference. And on top of it, we are going through so much mentally because we are like, can I actually, like make it to that conference on time? Will I be able to go there? Shall I actually start planning? And then like for example, what happened to last summer is that I also made so many plans for Italy, but I couldn't make it to the conference in Italy. I could only make it to the one in Greece. That was the plan. And then after that, like because my visa application was found inadmissible, I also spent so much time to be able to like reimburse, like to get some of the money I spent just for my visa application. So like think about the time, I could have written an article, like in that time, literally. I could have like done something totally, like different, which would help my life. But this didn't help at all, other than creating so many problems and that Twitter thread. Really, that's it. So I'm gonna stop here, and Michael is here. Maybe while his connection is good, maybe he can start talking about it.
Yes, Michael, I've already introduced you, so I mean, please go ahead and if you have access to the mic.
Hi, yeah, sorry for that. My internet connection went off, so I had to go find a place where the connection is a bit okay. So I'm out of the office actually. Yeah, so I will share a bit about my experience and then try to diagnose what some of the problems are, why this happens, and then also give some few recommendations. Since I couldn't sit through Ozden's talk, probably she might have mentioned some of the things I would say. So I was in Switzerland to carry out research at the Heart Foundation in 2020, early March of 2020. That was not the first time I was traveling outside of my country. In fact, the first time I ever traveled was to the US. This was in 2017, and I had no issue at all with visa. It was for a conference at which I was only a participant, not even a presenter. But everything was fully funded, and I got a visa. And it was the first time I was traveling. I had no history at all of travel. Then subsequently, I went a few times to the UK, did some transits in other countries, and then applied to Switzerland for a Schengen visa to carry out this research from South Africa. So I was given the visa, and but 2 weeks into my travel, COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. And so I had to cut short my visit and return to South Africa. Unfortunately, my flight was canceled. And so I could only return to Ghana, and then borders were closed. So I've been in Ghana since then. Went through a whole lot of issues, so I couldn't finish up my work, and then had to take employment here. Then opportunity for me to return to Switzerland comes, and then my visa is denied. And that is where I couldn't understand why the visa would be denied. So my plan was to spend 1 month in Switzerland, and I had also received admission into the American School of Classical Studies in Athens for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So I was applying for a Schengen visa. Since Greece is also part of the Schengen region, I was applying to Switzerland because that was where I was going to spend the most time. According to the rules, you have to apply at the place where you spend the most time. So I put in the application. My research is funded. My stay is fully funded. Accommodation, feeding, everything is funded. So the only thing I had to take care of is the flight. And I included bank statements. I included letters of confirming my employment in Ghana, confirmation from the registrar that I will return to my work. So every document that was required was submitted. And then the decision comes, and it is a no. And this is where the problems comes in, because the reasons that were given for the denial were unreasonable. The first reason that was given was that the purpose and reason and conditions for my intended stay were unreliable. However, the letters that were given to me by the Heart Foundation and the American School of Classical Studies clearly stated the purpose for which I was going to be there. That is to conduct research on my PhD. Clearly stated that I had received funding. They were going to take care of my accommodation and my full boarding. So everything was stated there. And yet the embassy decided that those conditions that were given, or the reasons that were given, were unreliable. And I find that strange, because these are two reputable organizations within the field of classics. And for us in our part of the world, for us in Africa, it is very difficult to access a lot of the ancient texts. You know, it is very difficult. So for most of the time, you have to travel out of your region in order to have access to these materials. And so for somebody like me, who is conducting research in ancient philosophy, in the classical field, not having access to these materials, these visa denials then create problems for my academic progress, because your institution expects that within a certain time frame, you would have moved from the particular rank that you are into another rank, because your employment, even though permanent, is also time bound in terms of you moving through the academic ladder. So if access to these materials is difficult because you are being denied visas, then one, it affects your progress or your career progression as a scholar. So that is one. Then there is the issue of the time spent in putting together these applications, not only with the visas, but also with the applications to conduct research in these countries. So after going through all that, and then you apply for the visas and then you are denied, it's just dampens your spirit. It demotivates you as somebody in the field. There have been a lot of times when I have asked myself whether this was actually whether I made the right decision to venture into this field, because sometimes it becomes really, really frustrating, very, very frustrating. Then the third issue is that it seems to me that there is some lack of awareness of I don't know what the word is, but there's some sort of lack of awareness of why it is important for scholars, no matter what region they are from. There's a lack of awareness that such scholars can contribute to knowledge, can contribute to development in these countries where who in quotes serve as custodians of the very materials that we need to be able to carry out our research. There is this tacit understanding that all knowledge is reserved for those in Europe or for those in North America, or that they are the only experts, or they are the only ones who can contribute to knowledge. So when you deny these visas, these are some of the implied thoughts that come out, because one, there is proof that the person is employed in an African institution. There is proof that the person is an expert in the field that under which he's carrying out research. There is proof that the person has the financial means. There is proof that the person is funded. There is proof that the person has ties to his or her country. So what other reason is there apart from these tacit ones that are not stated explicitly to deny a scholar who has everything to be able to carry out this research from accessing these materials? So that also brings into the question of racism, because the statistics show that if you take the number of visas that are denied, for example, for conferences in Europe and America, you notice that a lot of the denials, majority of the denials, are against scholars from African countries. The Canadian Association for African Studies, I think in 2019 or so, made a statement to this effect, where a lot of Africans were denied visas to attend the conference in Canada. There have been examples in the UK where Africans have been denied visas, I think in the London School of Economics, where majority of Africans were denied visas to these conferences. So the question of racism also comes in. And some of the excuses that are given are just outrageous and so unreasonable. In one situation that I read about, it says that there is no evidence that the scholar would benefit from the trip. It doesn't make sense. There's a researcher who is attending the conference, and you are telling the researcher that there is no evidence that he will benefit from the trip. Because these days, funding organizations expect that collaborations are carried out internationally, you know, cross collaboration from both the global north and the global south. Now, some funding organizations require that, for instance, if you are a UK researcher, you need to have a collaborator from Africa, or that if you're an African researcher applying to certain funding from such organizations, you need to have a collaborator, say from the UK or from the US or from another country. So if, I don't know whether it's a disconnect between what funding organizations are pursuing, the goals funding organizations are pursuing, and the goals that governments represented by, the goals that these embassies represented their governments are pursuing. I'm not sure whether there's that disconnect, but it is clear to me that the issue of racism is a key part of this problem. The issue of racism is a key part of it. If we refuse to acknowledge that there is a lot that those of us in the global south can contribute to knowledge production and even to the development in societies in the global north, then we are going to we are not going to achieve much in the near future in terms of, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, which says, one of them which says that equity in education for all, you know, equality and equity in terms of wealth creation, and so on and so forth. So then that brings me to my recommendations. The first recommendation I would make is that there needs to be some sort of training or awareness of the context in which we are in Africa, in other places where these visa denials occur, for embassy staff and diplomats. There should be that awareness. I think sometimes those who examine these visa applications are not aware of some of the struggles we go through in order to submit these applications, not to talk of the exorbitant visa fees. A second recommendation would be that I think governments need to make intentional efforts at fostering collaborations between those in the global south and the global north, and by instituting policies in visas that make it easy for researchers to access their institutions, to access their centers, and so on and so forth. So the visa requirements for people who are credibly researchers, who are credibly contributing to the knowledge economy, contributing to scientific discoveries, and so on and so forth, should be relaxed. There should be some kind of special concessions for those who have been invited by reputable organizations to conduct research or to conduct studies abroad. Yeah. I'm done.
Michael, thank you so much. You know, I just want to say that it's very impressive that the powers. I will just explain to them what a Dumso was, and I think Dumso has not left Ghana as well. But you left the building, you went into your car, and amidst all this, you are still here with us. I thank you for that. I want to say that you've raised very important points, not just sharing your experience, but you've also raised the very important point of institutional racism. Institutional racism is not about whether they know you, Okyere, Asante, but how they see you, how they view you as a man in Ghana, an African man in Ghana, and how they view you as someone who is either are deserving of this visa. And your suggestions are also I heard. I think the question of training, but I also wonder about the lack of political will, because we see it in governments, we see it in first world, global north governments, in universities. There's a discourse of recognition, a collaboration, and there's this language is a liberal discourse of we want you to come and share and to learn and to receive and to give. But the language of recognition is never, it's always filled with contradictions. It's always filled with ironies, as Heba pointed out when she spoke. So I would like to open the conversation up now. So if people have questions, if our panelists have anything to add, just raise your hand. And yes, Gideon, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirishi, for this. Thanks, Osdin, Heba, and Michael for sharing your experience. Let me start by way of introduction. My name is Gideon Christian. I'm a lawyer. I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Calgary. I'm also the president of African Scholars Initiative, which is a Canadian charity that seeks to attract bright future scholars of African descent to pursue graduate education in Canada. I'm also a consultant with visabarrier.ca, which is a research project that's currently looking at the issues that has been raised in this webinar. When it comes to the issue of visa barrier for people from the global south, that has been a very big issue in Canada here. And I say this being someone who has been at the forefront in seeking to address this issue within our local jurisdiction here in Canada. We've had a series of international conferences that has made the headline in Canada, not for the right reason, but for the wrong reason. And the wrong reason has always been how scholars or professionals from Africa were refused visa to attend these conferences. We have the Black AI Summit. We have, I think the most recent one was the Global AIDS Summit. I have been more involved on this issue at the study permit level, and my involvement at the study permit aspect of this, I've been watching or monitoring data and statistics with regards to visa refusal for international students from Africa seeking to come to study in Canada. I monitored that for some 7 years, but things took a different turn. I think that was late last year when I obtained the data that actually shows how high the disapproval rate or refusal rate for study permit from Africa has risen. Some countries were over 90% refusal rate. So that data came at a point in time when the Citizenship and Refugee Board, IRCC, which is of course the government department responsible for issuance of visa to enter Canada. They released a report, and I'm citing that report in reference to what Michael has said, the impact of racism on this. They released their anti-racism report. That anti-racism report established beyond doubt that racism is responsible for the way scholars and students and individuals from the global south are treated by this same government department responsible for this visa issue. In fact, in the report, that report noted that there is widespread reference of African countries as the dirty 30 by visa officers. Nigeria was singled out as being reputable for being fraudulent and dishonest. Now, with that report, I want to compare what that report contained with another important provision in our immigration law, which is Section 20 of the Immigration and Refugee IRPR, Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulation. Section 20 provides that any individual seeking to come into Canada to study must convince the visa officer that they have sufficient financial resources. Sufficient financial resources was not defined in that regulation, but there are manuals that are provided to the visa officers to guide them on the interpretation of the regulation. Now, you now go to that manual. That manual now provides the visa officers with guide as to how to interpret sufficient financial resources. And what that manual does now was to create two tiers of applicants. Some applicants were referred to as low risk, and some were referred to as high risk. And now this is where the racism comes in. The low risk applicants are applicants from countries that have this similar socio-economic background as Canada, countries that are visa free to enter Canada. And what are these countries? Predominantly countries in Europe, white countries in Europe. Now, the provision does not define the high-risk countries. So if the low-risk countries are countries that have socio-economic conditions similar to Canada, that automatically tells you who the high-risk countries are. Now, that is, of course, the element. I'm currently working on a research, and the research was to obtain federal case laws from federal courts that has dealt with the interpretation of this Section 2. And what I have observed so far, over 90% of federal court litigation on the provision, on the interpretation of this provision, are applicants from Africa. That provision we're talking about, or the guideline we're talking about here, tells the visa officers that if the applicants are from the low-risk countries, you can waive anything that has to do with financial requirements. You don't even need to ask them to produce bank statements, evidencing that they have sufficient funds to take care of themselves while they're visiting Canada. Whereas if the applicant is from the high-risk country, which we now know, then the visa officer is required to take additional steps to verify their financial sufficiency. So this is actually what has been responsible for this high visa refusal rate. And what I did was to organize some scholars of African descent here. We wrote a letter to the immigration minister, drawing the attention of the minister to their own reports, where their officers are referring to Africans as deity, and requested that the minister should take steps to address this issue. The minister got back to us and denied that they don't treat anybody differentially. Office is not biased, they treat everybody equally, which is inconsistent with what they have in their own report. We escalated this matter to the Canadian Parliament. Earlier this year, I was invited twice before the House of Commons Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. And I will share with you the video of the sitting, the two sitting. And I made it very clear at that meeting that this is a very serious problem. And it is a problem that nobody has been willing to address. But I'm very happy at least they were able to, give us opportunity to make that presentation. The committee eventually released their reports where these issues were addressed, of course, based on our recommendation. But the problem now is that is a recommendation, which IRCC is not obligated to implement. So we are waiting to see, if they will implement this to address the problem. But what I want to conclude here is this. When it comes to addressing this issue, there is very little these scholars from the continent can do. I think the issue, addressing this issue lies heavily on those of us who are in this part of the world who have access to be able to speak out on their behalf. If we are able to do this, then we can be able to make that push. Now, there has always been these comments that, okay, since Canada is not granting them visa, maybe next time we shouldn't host the conference here, we should move the conference to some other place. Unfortunately, that's like, say, running away from the problem. If you continue moving the conference to Africa or to some other place, then that means for scholars like us who are here, we can't invite people from the continent to come in here to attend conference just because the government department is not willing to issue them visa. And that is wrong.
I think what you're saying is truly extremely important. I just want to point out that we have about maybe half an hour left, and we would like to.
Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I just want to thank the presenters for sharing their experience.
you know, what you said was extremely important, because I think we needed to hear that there are people on this side of the, you know, in Canada who are actually are pushing for systemic change and posing the questions, the hard questions, because a discrimination will never actually go away unless it is brought out onto the light, and it is a challenge institutionally as well. So the question is, like you said, you are still waiting to hear back. So we'll wait and see whether they do make any changes. Mashmuel, you've been very patient. Do you have you have your hand raised up? Would you like to ask your question or make your comment? And can we limit it to about 2-3 minutes?
Okay, you hear me? Okay, I want to ask a question. I haven't comment. I want just to ask a question, and I want to ask when here speak about issues in access visa to North America, to Europe, for students and scholars from poor countries, from former colonial countries of Africa, of Asia, if when we speak about all these subjects, we can to say that discrimination in access visa to North America and to Canada, this type of neocolonialism, this continuing of colonialism just in another forms. Different forms. Thank you.
So, yeah, so what I think I hear you say is that there's a different form of a colonialism in play or enforced when visas are actually not granted. And this actually speaks very well to the question of institutional racism, but also to the question of the idea of the global South, the less developed or the richer countries versus the not so rich countries, which are usually along the lines around through which colonialism was basically experienced. And so we like to open up the comment. Thank you very much for that. And that's a very, very important point. I think also thank you to Gideon for bringing up what they've been doing or what you've been doing here. Any other questions or comments from our panelists? Michael, Heba, Amelis. Yeah, Heba.
Yes, I have a commentary on something that Gideon said, which I think is very important, because I totally agree with the recommendations that Melis have made, but I just disagree on one point, is that moving conferences to somewhere else that we have easy access to, because I think it shouldn't be on us to find solutions for this problem, like how, because this is the issue currently in many disciplines of who should carry the weight of decolonization, who should carry the weight of solving the problems. I have no access to the Canadian Parliament, let's say. I have no access to the UK Parliament, but my fellow colleagues in the UK and Canada have. And I think this is what we are expecting from them, because this is the least that one can do if you're studying a certain culture and you've been gaining academic benefits from, and you've been making so much gain out of researching us and our country. You do have an ethical obligation of giving something back. This is an ethical obligation. This is not something that I should be grateful for, or that you're doing this to help us, or you're being, no, you should share the space and privilege you've got to do something about this. I don't think we are currently in a stage, or that given the long history of colonialism, that we are in a position to find fixes for systems that have been so much ingrained that we are still struggling and suffering from. This is not work that is upon us. We shouldn't be the ones doing this work. It should be part of academic integrity, because academic integrity and ethics of academia doesn't only come with following plagiarism or like the rules of plagiarism. It's not only putting pens on paper and having such authentic research papers, but it equally comes with the ethos of being part of an academic community. And that is what I'm expecting from my colleagues, that they should be campaigning for us. I shouldn't be finding solutions for a problem that I haven't created myself. I'm always at the lower link. I'm always always part of the repressive cycle. I'm always being oppressed or repressed. I'm never part of the agency link that leads or to any of this. I'm always at the receiving end. So I don't think it's, for me, it is my job or our job to find solutions for these academic institutions. I don't think so.
Thank you very much, Heba. This actually is in line with what was said earlier as well, that the fact that the work should not be from, like, we should not just move conferences to the Global South without, or we shouldn't have the work being put on academics from the Global South or in the Global South, because it's already a lot of mental stress around the time in applications and the waiting that takes place and the rejections and all that, so I'll pass it on to Amelis, who wants to also say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Heba, I can definitely see where you are coming from, like why you are saying that. And let me contextualize that suggestion a little bit more, because again, I kind of like suggested all of these solutions based on my own observations in some international associations I have been part of. What I observed usually is that, again, maybe this is specific to my discipline, social/political psychology. Maybe that's not the case for you, but at least from some of the examples you gave, I think it is also the case in your own discipline, is that when people talk about international, they usually mean North America and Western Europe. So that's one of the reasons I actually said, when you organize those conferences in such places, you are not talking about international conferences. That's where I'm coming from. And I said that you should even start thinking about organizing conferences outside of North America, outside of Western Europe. And there are also some like really good countries in that respect. So I'm not really suggesting anything like we should put the burden on, like Global South scholars. They should organize. Not at all. That's what I was trying to say. But again, I couldn't make it in a 7-minute talk. But that was the reason that I tried to. That's the reason why I actually started with that recommendation, because that's one of the how should I say, frustrations I had with the associations I have been a member of, right? Because again, I can even shame them a little bit. So like one of the organizations like International Society of Political Psychology, again, I have been a member for 10 years. It is International Society of Political Psychology. And when you actually check the conferences they organize, the places, 1 year it is in North America, the next year it's in Europe. They just switch, and this is what they call themselves. So that's really, again, maybe it is unique to my own discipline, but anyway, I'm gonna stop here, but hopefully it makes more sense. I just wanted to contextualize it a little bit.
It's absolute sense. And I wasn't really criticizing the recommendation. I was just bringing it from my perspective, because something that is usually also missed, that we equally have the right to visit new places. We equally have the right to go to Europe and to go to North America. And because there is equal the finances, in the sense that if a conference is offering us funding to travel somewhere in a new country, maybe that could be our only opportunity in life to be able to visit such country, specifically for certain parts of the world, like be it in Africa, the Middle East, or in North Africa. The misdistribution of wealth, or even in South America, means that at times this could be our only opportunity to visit certain places. And I think we do have this right. We do have this right to visit new places. Something else also, considering the funding that is offered for conferences, etc. They never take in consideration that perhaps traveling from my side of the world to somewhere else, the ticket itself would be far more expensive given the distance. And this is something that is never, there is usually a lump sum offered to everyone, as if we are all traveling from the very same spot to the other, and they are not reflecting on how then all the funding that I would be getting, I might be spending it on the flight ticket. That would mean that the the fact, if this was intended for equality, that is, equality is gone, it's done. Others who would be traveling from Europe, within Europe, would have to pay far less in terms of flight cost compared to me coming from Africa, from the north, or even from the South Africa, that's the very bottom, such a long distance. So all of the funding offered would be eaten up by the flight ticket. And in that respect, there is no equality there, because then my other colleagues from Europe would have much more spare money to spend on accommodation, etc., etc.
Thank you for that. I have Belinda Dotson. I believe you might have a question. If I'm wrong, then just don't respond. But I was told you might have a question to ask. If you do, you can open your mic, turn on your mic, and ask the question.
Hi, I mean, I didn't specifically, I was just pointing out in the chat that the Canadian Association of African Studies has been active on this problem for a long time, but frankly, it feels a bit like hitting our head against a brick wall. So, I mean, in 2018, we met in person with sort of senior officials in Immigration and Refugees Canada to discuss the issue. And they were polite and helpful, but kind of, as Gideon was saying, denied that there was any discrimination. But it's clear that there is. I mean, from subsequent internal reports of that department, it shows that there is systemic and embedded racism among officials. I think, though, I mean, my broader question is really about the political versus the bureaucratic. I mean, my impression after that meeting was that it's really embedded in the bureaucracy. So, you know, there are racist bureaucrats, and also bureaucrats are inherently risk averse. So it's easier for somebody at an embassy or high commission somewhere in Africa to deny a visa than to, you know, recommend approving that visa in case something, you know, goes wrong. The person doesn't come back, or they end up being a security threat, or whatever it is. So the easy option for the bureaucrats in the system, even if they aren't themselves racist, is to say no. So I mean, that's a harder challenge than convincing Parliament or MPs to deal with that kind of bureaucratic, kind of systemic obstacles. And also in Canada, it stayed the same whether we have a Conservative Party in government or a Liberal Party in government. So it's not so much, I mean, the government will, or MPs will deny that it's a problem. The senior officials will deny that it's a problem. It clearly is a problem. So it makes the entry point really hard to kind of figure out. I mean, that's why I admire Gideon's work, like actually speaking to the parliamentary committee, getting media attention and so on. And I think, I mean, we just, all of us in our own context have to keep doing that and kind of, you know, embarrass and shame government bureaucracies into changing their practices. But it's hard and it's a long-term slog. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the kind of parallel bureaucracy of VFS, the so-called visa facilitation services, which is this very opaque global company that actually processes visas for, I think, the majority of countries in the world now. It's insane. I mean, they certainly do Canada, they do Britain. And it's never been clear to me what exactly they do and where their role stops and the kind of bureaucrats' role begins. The government, the Canadian government, will tell us that, oh, it's always somebody working for the Canadian government who makes the final decision, but I'm not sure on what basis they make that decision, other than an algorithm-driven recommendation from VFS, who processes all the biometrics and gets all the documentation into a kind of package that then goes to the bureaucrat. So I think those two things, I mean, the bureaucracy and the role of VFS, I think, are really maybe where we need to turn our attention.
Thank you very much for that. That's these are also very, very important points. The political versus the bureaucratic. Also, bureaucrats tend to be risk averse, and I think that's true. And there is an institutional racism. I was listening to a video by the Canadian ambassador in Ghana speaking about visas, and she was saying very confidently, if you just want to travel to Canada from Ghana 4 to 6 weeks, expect you should wait 4 to 6 weeks. My friends have been waiting for a visa for 6 months, and they have all the paperwork, which proves that all the paperwork that you are required to provide, if you provide, is not sufficient. So what then becomes the question? I think Michael addressed that well, so did all our panelists, there is also an institutionalized bureaucratic form of racism inbuilt into the system. And do we have the political will? Do our universities, our institutions that in the global north have the political will? I want to slowly wrap up because we're coming towards the end of this conversation. I know some of our panelists also can't stay till for too long. So I want to wrap up with one of our the questions in the chat, which is also from our co-sponsor, the chair of UTSC's Cultural and Historical Studies. Natalie, you have a question. She writes, thank you for all the speakers for the powerful insights in calling out structural racist issues at play. Not to absolve those of us with the privileged passports in the global north from doing the critical advocacy and planning work that Heba just pointed out to. I'm wondering if colleagues on this call have any insights on other models of scholarly meetings that are more inclusive and accessible. Are there hybrid models, unconferences, or other types of events that you have participated in that have worked? The funding and logistical challenges, environmental footprints of international travel affect some scholars with the right passports too. So I guess the question is, she'd be interested in insights on how we can do this better, short of all virtual, horrible, endless sessions on Zoom. Any last words? I want to leave the final 5 minutes for our panelists. Perhaps we can go with Melis, Heba, and Michael. Any also last points?
Yeah, sure. Natalie, I mean, I mentioned this point a little bit in my recommendations as well. And I think this like hybrid model should be constant in future meetings, no matter what. I mean, people, of course, like if they want to, they should be given the opportunity to come in person, because I know that these conferences, especially for early career scholars, are really, really important to network, to find some like future jobs. So I am not saying that everything should be online, because I know that because during the pandemic, we also suffered from these Zoom meetings, right? Girish, you said that sometimes we don't even know in which Zoom room we are in, right? So my recommendation is to have these like options, especially for scholars, you know, like who prefer not attending conferences due to environmental reasons, and also scholars who cannot attend, or maybe, you know, like or just like both environmental reasons and visa reasons, who cannot attend, they should be at least given the opportunity. At least in the ones I've attended so far in the last 2 years, I would say, they have been working quite well. But of course, I don't know if it's only my experience or maybe others disagree. So I'm gonna stop here.
Thanks, Melis. Heba, go ahead.
Yes, I think I totally agree with Melis on the hybrid model, but something else is that there are two things that I've seen that has been applied. For example, in UCL now, they limit attendance to a certain number. That's for COVID, but equally for the international travel footprint. And a solution which I found that has been very interesting for a museums lab program that I've attended, that was funded by the German Foreign Office, in realizing the problems with accessibility when it comes to the internet and how that this is not always feasible. What they've done is that they've allowed us, the scholars who would be joining, it was a hybrid model, and for us who are joining online, given given the digital access and internet accessibility is difficult around Africa and the North and North Africa too, they offered us facilities in their offices in the Goethe Institute that is based here in Cairo, let's say, or that is based in Ghana or whatever. We were offered the opportunity that for the days of the conferences that we go and have specific offices to get that has desktop, that has internet accessibility that we can have access to. And I think that this came after campaigning from our European colleagues, ensuring that they will not join the conference or they will not join the program unless there are regulations that are put in place that ensures that even joining in online is accessible for everyone. So this is something that could be done, because sadly, given the neo-colonialism we live in, most of the foreign institutions in African continents would have far better connection than the connection I would have here at home. So one way of reparation and repatriation is giving me, like, sharing this access and this privilege with me, because even privilege could exist. It doesn't have to be too far away. There is still, it can exist even if in the country itself, in the previously colonized country, where there is the very same foreign colonial power that still have some sort of an establishment within the country, they would have far more privilege than myself. So it can be a way of pushing for us to share these privileges, be them in the global north or the ones that still exist in the global south as well. So these are two extremely successful models that I've seen, and I think they could be a good way forward.
Thank you, Heba. So Michael, coming from the country where Kwame Nkrumah coined the term neo-colonialism, we have 2 more minutes. Any last words, Michael? Or would you rather?
Right. I lost connection on the line. Yeah, I think this conversation needs to keep going on, and I would actually call on institutions, global institutions, to make statements to their governments, not just associations, but I'm talking about the university-wide community making united statements to their governments, pointing out why it is very important for researchers from all over to have access, to these places. It's very important for our survival.
Thank you so much to all our panelists, to Melis, to Michael, to Heba, to our organizers, and to our sponsors as well, and to all of you who have come here and who have stayed with us through this conversation. This is an important conversation because it's not going to go away so soon, but I think we need to, like, the suggestions of being angry, making noise, shaming, pushing, and it has to come equally from the institutions in the global north, from the universities, from the people who have the power to speak to the people who are the bureaucrats making these decisions. Because without the political will, language of recognition, and we want to be here to help you, is not going to do anything. So we need to be angry and stay angry in a positive way that we can change things, hopefully, and make things better for us to be able to move and share. Reciprocity is important. It's not just about the talk of it. Thank you everyone for being here. On behalf of the blog Everyday Orientalism, Girish Daswani, I want to thank you all for sharing the space with us. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.